I'm from San Diego, California, and my name is Judith. I never imagined that I would be sharing this tale. I was a typical woman going about her life, working hard and providing for her family. But on October 7, 2024, everything changed. I was gone for a few minutes, but during that time I saw something. Something that still deeply disturbs me beyond this planet. I must tell you this, because the truth cannot wait. When I met Jesus, he left me dumbfounded with what he revealed me concerning the spiritual deceit occurring in this world, particularly about race. The morning of October 7, 2024 began like any other Tuesday. I got up early, stretched my arms, and gave thanks to God for another day. The sun shone through my window, casting a gentle golden glow across my room. I changed into my navy blue work uniform, went to the kitchen where the smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and had a simple breakfast before leaving for work. I worked as a nurse at a senior living facility, and I had a full schedule that morning. I had always loved caring for the elderly, their wisdom, their stories, and the way they viewed the world. I visited Mrs. Ezekiel, who was always sharing stories about her childhood, and Mr. Nicholas, who enjoyed humming old gospel hymns. It was a typical quiet day, and I had no idea that my life would drastically change in a matter of hours. It had begun to rain lightly, but I wasn't worried because I had driven in the rain countless times before, turning on my favorite gospel station and humming along to the music as I made my way down the familiar road. Then, suddenly, everything changed. One moment I was driving, my hands gripping the wheel, my mind full of thoughts of dinner and rest, and the next, headlights blinded me. Forever by evening, I was exhausted, my shift ended, and I was eager to get home. My body jerked forward, the seatbelt digging into my chest, and then everything faded into nothingness. A truck was speeding toward me, skidding on the wet pavement, and my heart slammed against my chest as I instinctively tried to swerve, but it was too late. The impact was violent, with metal crunching, glass shattering, and a deafening noise filling my ears. I don't remember feeling pain. I don't remember screaming. I just remember darkness for a moment. Everything was silent. There was no pain, no panic, just an overwhelming emptiness. I should have been terrified, but strangely I wasn't. I wasn't in my car anymore. I wasn't even in my body. I realized something was different when I looked down and saw myself lying motionless inside my crushed vehicle. I could see the shattered windshield, the way the rain was falling in slow motion, the flashing red and blue lights from the ambulance arriving at the scene. But the strangest thing, I wasn't inside my body. I felt light, almost weightless. It was like floating, but not in the way we think of on Earth. There was no gravity, no sense of up or down. I just existed. Watching as paramedics rushed to my side, I saw their faces, their frantic movements as they tried to pull me from the wreckage. One of them, a young man with dark hair and worried eyes, was shouting my name. "Judith, can you hear me?" I wanted to answer, but I couldn't. It was as if my voice no longer belonged to me. I attempted to move, but my body was no longer in it, and as I hovered over the scene, I noticed something amazing. Everything appeared clearer and brighter, and I could see details I had never noticed before, like raindrops shimmering like tiny diamonds, the way the grass swayed in the wind, and the subtle glow of life itself. Then I saw my mother, who had died 5 years prior, standing close to the ambulance, watching everything unfold. She wasn't talking, but her face was filled with peace as she gazed at me. Her eyes were filled with love, and then I realized I was dead. This should have made me feel afraid, but instead I felt a peculiar sense of serenity. I felt as like I had transcended time itself, and all of my worries, anxieties, and terror vanished when I noticed a light that wasn't the flashing ambulance lights or the truck's headlights. This light was alive, appearing both everywhere and nowhere at once, and it was warm, calling to me like a long-lost friend. I felt like I was being drawn toward it, and as I got closer, a profound sense of love filled every part of me. It was like entering the arms of someone who had known me my entire life, someone who had been waiting for me. Then I heard Judith's voice, and I knew right away that it was Jesus. I wasn't just floating anymore, I was being drawn toward the light. And it wasn't frightening or something I resisted. It felt like coming home after being lost for years. The warmth, the love, and the overwhelming peace were unlike anything I had ever experienced on earth. As I got closer, I felt something I can only describe as purity, as if every burden, mistake, and regret I had ever carried in my life were being stripped away. The light wasn't just bright, it was alive, and it wasn't just around me, it was inside me. I knew who was waiting for me before I even saw him. I didn't need an introduction or proof, because I knew deep down that it was Jesus. His presence was so overwhelming that I could hardly process it. It was like standing in front of the sun, only instead of burning, his light filled the voids in my body, causing me to fall to my knees. I'm not sure if I had knees like that, but I felt the action of bowing before him out of a deeper sense of love or reverence. And every part of my body acknowledged his authority, goodness, and power. Then he spoke again. Judith, gets up. When I stood up, I saw him fully for the first time. His face was beyond words. It was not simply lovely. I felt like a child gazing into the boundless sky as his eyes emanated love. Not the kind of love we talk about on earth, but a love so broad and deep that it filled me completely. Yet there was also sorrow in his eyes. At first, I couldn't understand why Jesus, the King of Kings, the Prince of Peace, would have grief in his eyes. However, before I could question, he extended his hand, and as soon as his fingers touched mine, I felt a wave of understanding wash over me. I witnessed everything, including the suffering, deceit, and manner people had been led astray. I also witnessed people dividing themselves without recognizing that they were being influenced by invisible powers. I witnessed a spiritual conflict raging throughout the world, rather than a physical one, and the majority of people were unaware that they were involved. I couldn't stop crying, so I said, "Lord, what's going on?" Before I could comprehend what was occurring, Jesus gave me such a mournful expression, yet his voice stayed firm. "Come, Judith. There is something you must see." Everything changed. The tunnel of light extended in front of me, and then all of a sudden I was moving through it. I wasn't walking or flying. Rather, I felt as though I was being carried along with ease as I glided forward. The light wasn't just all around me, it was flowing through me, giving me energy and warmth that I had never experienced before. I began to hear music in the distance, but it wasn't the kind of music we hear on earth. It was just strong, alive voices. Singing words I didn't comprehend yet, we blended together in perfect harmony. And suddenly, I discovered something amazing. The tunnel's walls were made of moving pictures rather than solid ones. Each one depicted a moment in my life, but instead of seeing it from my own point of view, I saw it through Jesus's eyes. I saw myself sitting by myself on the playground as a child. I had always assumed that no one noticed me, but in this vision I saw angels standing by my side, proving that even in my loneliness, I had never really been alone. I saw instances where I had forgotten to speak kindly to a stranger, when I had forgiven someone who had wronged me, and times when I had prayed in private for people who had no idea that every moment mattered and that every action had reverberated into eternity. "Lord, I had no idea," Jesus grinned, but his look was solemn. "Every decision has consequences. Judith, every word, every action, which is why I have to show you what happens next." The tunnel shifted once more, and all of a sudden I was looking toward the future rather than my past. The light around me dimmed, and I found myself standing in what appeared to be a typical city street where people were going about their daily lives. At first, nothing seemed unusual, But then I noticed something strange. No one was talking to each other. Instead, they were moving through the streets with their eyes fixed on tiny glowing devices implanted under their skin. Families were sitting together in restaurants, but instead of talking, they were staring blankly into the air, as if guided by something invisible. I turned to Jesus, my heart thumping, and he looked at me, and his eyes held an expression I could only describe as profound sorrow mixed with unwavering love. I wanted to ask so many questions, but before I could say anything more, everything around us changed again. I was no longer in the city, and I was standing in a place that felt more real than anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't heaven yet, but it was a place of divine presence, and the air felt alive with an indescribable scent of purity, love, and holiness. There was no sun, but there was light everywhere, emanating from a single source in the distance. Then he stepped forward, and although I had already sensed his presence, I saw him in all his glory. Jesus' white robes, which were unlike any other fabric on earth, shimmered as though they were made of light itself. His face, on the other hand, was both familiar and indescribable. His eyes held depths of love, wisdom, fire, and righteousness, so great that I felt as though I could dissolve into them. I instantly fell to my knees, but I wasn't compelled to because my soul knew who he was, and the only thing I could do was worship him because every fiber of my being recognized him, not just as my savior, but also the reason I was here, had a voice that was both gentle and powerful, full of authority and compassion. He said, "Rise, Judith, I have a lot to show you." His hand reached out, and as soon as he touched me, waves of love and truth poured into me. He saw every fear I had ever had, every doubt and every hidden wound in my soul. But his love never wavered. He looked at me gravely and he said, "Lord, why did you bring me here?" His expression was serious, because the world is being deceived and you must see the truth before it's too late. At that moment, everything changed again, and I saw the world, but not just as we see it in the physical realm. I saw entire cities covered in a thick, dark mist that most people could. This darkness wasn't natural. It wasn't the absence of light, but rather a living, creeping. The illusion is the force around governments, churches, and even nations. Judith, Jesus claimed that I watched in horror as people went about their lives knowing nothing at all, scrolling through their phones, working, raising their kids, and so on. But something was controlling them and influencing their thoughts and emotions without their knowledge. Then I noticed a certain trend that was taking the world by storm, a type of technology that was becoming indispensable to day-to-day living. I saw people getting implants. The world will be ready thanks to these small illuminating gadgets under the skin. They weren't just regular microchips, they were spiritual bonds that were disguised as convenience. Jesus remarked gravely, "I saw pastors stand at pulpits and tell their congregations that these new technologies were a blessing and that God had provided them for a safer and better future." I turned to Jesus and asked him, "Don't they see it?" He shook his head, "No, because they don't ask me. They trust the world's wisdom over mine." I wanted to yell for them to wake up and warn them, but I couldn't because I saw Christians voluntarily accepting them, believing that it was just a new way to interact with the modern world. Jesus told me there was more when he showed me where Judith was, but at first I didn't know where he was leading me. Jesus said something that rocked me to my core. I saw people of all races and colors going through life with deeply ingrained divisions that they didn't even recognize. I saw black people carrying pain, anger, and resentment that had been passed down through generations, sometimes without even knowing why. I saw white people carrying shame, confusion, and guilt as they tried to figure out their place in the world. When the spiritual reality reached me, I gasped. I perceived darkness because the distinction between black and white was artificially created. Forces lying to both groups, faking history, exaggerating injuries, and using suffering as a weapon against black people. The enemy muttered that you are not appreciated and that you should never forgive white people. Hold onto your rage. Both sides were believing the deception when the enemy whispered, "You are accountable for everything. You are guilty by birth, and you can never do enough to make up for the past." The enemy uses history to keep them blind, but I come to set them free. There is no black or white, only my people. Jesus turned to face me, his voice full of compassion and urgency. As I witnessed the spiritual chains encircling people's minds, I started crying. It was never about race. It was always about control. And I now realized why Jesus was sad. People were so preoccupied with battling one another that they failed to notice the true conflict taking place above them. Jesus put his hand on my shoulder and told me the truth. Some people will listen, some won't, but the truth must be spoken. I was so overcome by what I had just witnessed, the division, the deception, the way the enemy had twisted everything, that I was trembling as I looked at Jesus. "Judith, this deception is powerful, and many people will be lost as a result. How did we get here? How did we allow this to happen?" Jesus spoke to me with such love and grief that I felt my spirit crack, Judith. My people have lost their identity since that moment. I felt a wave of understanding wash over me. In addition to dividing individuals based on race or falsehoods, the enemy has stolen their identities. I witnessed people aimlessly pursuing meaning in transient things. Then, in a flash, I was transported to what appeared to be a great hall filled with souls, not physical bodies, but beings of light, full of potential and promise, who had not yet been born. Jesus explained that each person is sent with a purpose and is given gifts to fulfill their calling, but that once they enter the world, the enemy starts working, confusing, weakening, distracting, and making them forget why they were sent. I saw these pure souls come into the world, and from the moment they were born, the fight for their identity and destiny began. Some of them grew up in loving homes where they were led toward their divine calling, while others were misled by broken families, addictions, or pain that made them doubt their own significance. Or they were tricked by society into thinking their value was determined by their accomplishments, intelligence, or appearance. The enemy had a whole system in place to prevent people from realizing the purpose God had placed within them. Heartbroken, I turned to Jesus and asked him how we could combat this and wake people up. In the midst of all this deception, he showed me something that gave me hope. He took my hands in his and said, "Tell them who they are. Tell them why they were created, and most importantly, tell them that I have not forgotten them." He showed me ordinary people, teachers, mothers, fathers, workers, students, pastors, leaders, all of whom carried a light that pushed back the darkness around them. These are my warriors. According to Jesus, they don't need swords or other weapons because their weapon is truth. The more these people proclaimed the truth, the more their enemies were unable to stop them, because truth is stronger than lies. When Jesus said those words, everything around us changed again. The warmth and tranquility of his presence were still there, but what I saw next stunned me. I was standing in what appeared to be a huge city, larger than anything I had ever seen, but something felt off. The buildings were sleek and modern, with glowing screens everywhere. The streets were silent, even though thousands of people were moving through them. There were no cars. Instead, people were just walking in perfect lines, their faces emotionless, their eyes fixed on invisible data streams projected in front of them. With my heart racing, I turned to Jesus and asked him, "What is this?" His face was sad. And I realized that this is how the world will be if people don't wake up. I watched as people went about their daily lives, working, eating, and shopping, but something was missing. No one laughed, no one cried, and no one questioned anything. Then, above the city, I saw the source of power. a huge holographic image of a charismatic, well-spoken leader who was admired and adored by everyone. Jesus said, "The one they will trust, but they will not see the chains he places upon them until it is too late." I saw governments advocating for unity, safety and peace, but behind their words was something sinister. People voluntarily gave up their freedoms, thinking they were improving the world, until I saw something that made me shudder. First, I couldn't see what it was, but as I got closer, I realized that they were getting an upgrade, a small implant just under their skin. I turned to Jesus in shock. "Lord, is this the mark?" He shook his head. "No, but this is how they will be led to accept it, step by step, deception by deception, first making it convenient, then making it necessary, and finally making it mandatory." My eyes were watering, and I wanted to yell at them to stop, but they couldn't hear me because they were too engrossed, too duped, and too ready to believe the system. I turned to Jesus in desperation, and his voice was full of both sorrow and hope. Some people would listen and some wouldn't, but those who know my voice will not be tricked, so you have to warn them before the time comes. And then everything changed once more. The city was gone when I found myself standing in an open field. The world has forgotten the power of choice. They think they are victims of their circumstances, but I gave them free will, which is the greatest gift I have ever given humanity. And yet so many choose destruction. The towering screens had disappeared, and everything was silent. Jesus stood beside me, looking out over the horizon, and I could feel the weight of what he had shown me pressing down on my soul. "Judith, they don't see it, Lord, so how can they make a decision when they aren't even aware that they are being duped?" I stared at him with tears in my eyes. Jesus looked at me with a forceful yet loving expression. "Which is why my people need to speak up, and the truth needs to be heard above lies." Suddenly I saw two paths in front of me. People proceeded down a broad, smooth and lovely route without concern, but as they continued I saw darkness engulfing them. They were unaware that they were headed for catastrophe. I turned to Jesus, my voice shaking, and he put his hand on my shoulder. I felt his love pouring into me, telling them the truth. "Some will reject it, some will mock you, but those who are mine will hear my voice, and when the time comes, they will know which path to take." Suddenly, I was no longer in the vision, and I was back in Jesus' presence. The weight of everything I had seen was still heavy on my soul, but now I felt something else. Hope. The other path was narrow and rough, full of obstacles and challenges, but at the end of it, there was light, and Jesus was waiting there with open arms. The easiest path, Judith, is comfortable, safe, and requires no sacrifice, but those who seek me, trust me, will take the harder road, and I will lead them home. I saw little slivers of light all over the world, people who refused to fit in and clung to Jesus in spite of the deception all around them. I saw them praying, worshipping, and warning anyone who would listen, and I realized something. They weren't afraid, even as the world grew darker. The enemy can't fool them, Judith, because they know my voice. These are the ones I have chosen to stand with in the last days. Tears filled my eyes when Jesus stated, "When the world turns against them, I will be their shield, not with swords or violence, but with truth." I had witnessed a great deal of misery and deceit, but now I saw something else, the strength of those who followed Jesus. By worldly standards, they were not strong. Many of them were regular people, such as mums, fathers, employees, and students. But in the spiritual world, they shone brightly like the stars. Jesus gave me a glance. With purposeful eyes, he went back to Judith and told those who were mine what he had witnessed. I felt like something was pulling me back. I looked at Jesus and said, "My heart breaks, Lord. I don't want to leave. I want to stay with you." He smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Your time is not yet finished. I felt like I was being pulled away from the light, and everything went dark again. I felt pain, the weight of my body returning, and the sound of machines beeping, and then I gasped for air. I was back in the hospital, and my eyes fluttered open, and I saw my family standing around me, their faces filled with shock that I was alive. I knew without a doubt that I had to share what Jesus showed me. The moment I took my first breath back in my body, it felt strange, as if I had been forced into something too small, limiting the weight of... My eyes flickered open when I noticed my family's faces hanging over me, overwhelmed by the pain in my limbs and the beeping of the hospital machines. With a mix of relief and horror, tears fell down their cheeks, and my sister firmly grasped my hand. The doctors had warned me that I wouldn't survive because of my terrible injuries, but God had other intentions, and as I adapted to being back, memories of what I had witnessed filled my head. I kept whispering my name as if saying it enough times would keep me here, the city's deceit. The enemy's hold on humanity was so evident in my soul, yet when I looked into my loved one's eyes, I saw something horrifying. They were enjoying their lives without realizing the war raging above them. My eyes filled with tears, and I had to tell them. I murmured, and my sister leaned in to tell us what I was trying to say. But my throat was dry and the words wouldn't come out. Despite my body's weakness, I couldn't get rid of the urgency inside of me. I closed my eyes and prayed, "Lord, give me the strength to share what you have shown me." Jesus had sent me back for a reason, and I wasn't intended to keep this to myself. For those of you reading this, the days after my return were some of the most difficult of my life. I attempted to explain what had occurred, but most people didn't believe me. The machines beeped regularly next to me. I had been given another opportunity, but it wasn't for me. Even some of my closest friends wrote it off as a dream, but my pastor advised me that although near-death experiences were powerful, I should be careful not to frighten people. My sister believed that I was confused after the accident. I felt alone and burdened by something too heavy for me to handle alone. But I knew deep down that I couldn't keep quiet, because Jesus had warned me that people wouldn't always listen. Then I began to notice something odd about what I had seen in my vision. News stories about digital identification systems replacing traditional banking, churches embracing artificial intelligence, and articles about implantable technology being used for payments. I thought this was just modern progress. I began conversing with everybody who would listen, since I knew I couldn't waste any more time. Some people rejected me, but others felt the same way. They had been noticing changes and the world was changing, but they were at a loss for words. It wasn't until I spoke that I realized I wasn't alone. God was already awakening people. I was only a messenger, but the hardest part was seeing the people I loved choose to ignore the truth. I could see the deception getting stronger every day. However, I knew I had done my part. I had spoken the truth, and Jesus had already told me that some would listen, while others would not. If you've read this far, you were meant to hear this. It's not just my story, it's a warning. I beg you to stay awake and pray for discernment, because Jesus didn't show me the things to scare me. Rather, he showed me so that I could warn you that the world is changing, that deception is already here, and that the enemy is coming with comfort and convenience rather than chains and force. At first, it will seem harmless and helpful, then it will become necessary, and finally it will be forced. Strengthen your faith now before it's too late. Jesus demonstrated to me that those who are his will be protected no matter how dark the world gets, and that his light will shine brighter. However, you must be willing to see the truth and choose him, even if it's difficult, or the world calls you crazy, because in the end, your soul is all that matters. Jesus has already won the battle, so it's up to you to decide which side you should support. I have done my part. The decision is yours.